All right, Marginal Gains listeners and viewers on our YouTube channel, welcome. Welcome. We have another great guest today. And yeah, I know, usually you don't hear Hadi leading off these interviews. Rest assured, Josh is here, but he is not the center point today. Today we have a terrific guest for us, a SILCA athlete too, which is great. We love to rotate our SILCA athletes in and check up on them, see how they're doing. And this is a name you should know. We hope you know. And that is Phil Gaimon. Phil Gaimon joins the show today. Phil, thanks for being here. First of all, big congratulations from us here at the Marginal Gains team on getting married.
Thank you. The marginal loss, I have a couple extra grams on my finger now. But no, it's great to be here. Appreciate you guys.
Yeah. How did you integrate the bike into the wedding and the honeymoon?
I didn't. My thing was I rode my bike to the venue, and then we didn't do any like biking down the aisle stuff. I didn't want to get into that. And the honeymoon hasn't happened yet, but I'm pretty sure it's going to include Girona. We're still figuring out. I don't know how people plan a wedding and a honeymoon at the same time. I was exhausted from the former, and I'm not planning shit for at least 6 months.
Yeah, it can become all consuming for some, I think. So
yeah, I got enough to do. I wanted to get married. That was the good part.
Yeah. Well, congratulations. That's very exciting.
Thank you.
Very exciting. Awesome. Well, I usually like to just start off where everybody starts off, which is like, how did you find the bicycle? Like, take us through that journey. Young Phil discovers the bicycle and then becomes pro. Sure.
In high school, like as a kid, you have a Huffy, like that kind of thing. So I always just kind of rode around the neighborhood. My grandparents lived like a half mile away, so I'd go check on them. I grew up in Atlanta, Georgia. But when I kind of started riding this was high school. I went to the way the schools worked in at least my area was kind of a mess. Like I went to a nerdy school where it wasn't like the closest one to my neighborhood. So you take a bus and it would go through every street in the city, and then you switch buses to a shuttle that would take you to the final. So like my bus trip would be like an hour 45 every morning before school. I have to be there at like 5 a.m. or 5:45, something like that. And it was horrible. And one day I missed the first bus, so I just jumped on my bike, didn't tell my parents, and rode it to the shuttle, which was like 2 miles. But since it didn't zigzag through the entirety of suburban Atlanta, I actually got there faster by bike, just riding on the sidewalk. So I did that for like half of my. Oh, and this point, by the way, I'm obese technically. I was into video games. I was drinking Coca-Cola, City of Atlanta. So that was a whole other thing. But I started riding my bike to the shuttle, and it was just more fun than being on the bus, and I could get up half an hour later. So I started doing that, and then at some point I was like, well, what if I just ride my bike all the way to school, which was a solid like 7.5 miles, which was insane to me at the time. And I started doing that. And I think I just did that for a few months, and that was like junior year of high school. And then at one point I just noticed like my size 38 pants were falling off, and I lost like 30 or 40 pounds. I didn't weigh myself. I was just a fat kid who didn't know how to do it. And I started riding my bike to visit my friends kind of all over the city and just, get in vague amounts of trouble, but not real trouble. Just get kicked out of malls, for being loud and obnoxious kind of deal. And at some point, like just from riding to do stuff and have adventures and see my friends that like didn't have a car at that age, I kind of just realized that the riding part was kind of as much fun as a destination. And I went to college, University of Florida, where I didn't know anybody. So I was like, well, I'll join the cycling club. I like riding bikes. And the cycling club, it didn't occur to me that like the cycling club at a college was like race focused, but that's what the cycling club does at a college. It was it's a sport. There was a club sport at UF, and there's a great coach, Dan Larson, who then his wife, Rebecca Larson, took over as the coach a few years later. We're still really good friends. They were at the wedding. But they kind of got me into training, and I got a road bike with skinny tires that fall. I think I showed up on like the first University of Florida team rides with like slick tires on a mountain bike. It was a stump jumper with shocks and everything. Everybody else was on like skinny tires and tights. I had a baggy t-shirt. And then the following, so that was like, August, September when the semester started. The following January, they had these like time trials and training races. And by then I have a road bike. And I won the first race I did. And it was like the first thing I was ever good at. It's the way I put it. And from there, I just got into racing and the whole community and the scene. And I loved it.
Wow.
And then how soon after did a idea of being a pro start to work in your mind a little?
I think to my own, it was kind of a mistake. I never really like looked ahead of the next step, which caught up to me eventually. But when I started racing, I was like, there was a guy in my dorm he was a Cat 3, and I was like, holy shit, a Cat 3. Could I, so I was a Cat 5 and I was like, oh, I want to be a 4, and I was a 4, I want to be a 3. And I got to Cat 1 in like 5 months. But I kind of continued that angle the whole time. So yeah, I wanted to be a pro. But the end of my first year racing, I joined like a very small pro team that only existed for 1 year. But I was 19 and had gotten to Cat 1 in 5 months. And actually Dan Larson, the coach at University of Florida, was hired to manage this team called VMG, which, long story, but they existed for a year, and that was a fun mess. But yeah, so I was thinking about being a pro. It was always like, okay, I want to be a pro now. And then I got to Jelly Belly at 23. And then it was, I want to be, oh crap, like I'm a pro and this sucks. I better go world tour. But whereas like a lot of people, I think if I was smarter, I would have looked at like, okay, here's where I am now. Here's where I want to be at age X. And these are the steps. Instead of like, I just always sort of floundered. It was just like, oh crap, this isn't enough. I better improve, or I better figure something else out. I see kids these days just like going right to world tour, being like, oh yeah, maybe I could have. Oh well. Yeah.
So you're saying, I mean, obviously the path is never linear to your goal. What were some of those big ups and downs, those oscillations, those vicissitudes that you had to get through in order to reach your final destination, which is Europe and racing with all those fast guys there?
Yeah, my experience was like a very specific like 4-year window that probably wasn't the best time to do it, sort of looking back. So this was like when Lance was getting caught and and all the sponsors were all kind of falling away. So like when my first year, doing the NRC circuit back then, so we're talking like 2006, we had HealthNet, Toyota United, Kodak Sierra Nevada, which is now like Rally. But there were a lot of guys like making six figures. There were team buses, RVs. Like it was a big professional scene in the US, and a very short, 2-3 years later, by the time I got to be good enough to join that scene, it didn't exist anymore. There wasn't really anything like that.
Yeah.
So like by the time, I would say like at that point, it's Scott Moninger won Redlands kind of thing. It was probably making low six figures. I won Redlands at 25 or 26, and my salary was $15,000 with Kendall Pro Cycling. So it was like a big dip in the way the sport was in that little window. And sort of my take at the time was like, they USA Cycling has this ladder. It's Cat 5, Cat 4, and it goes all the way up to pro. And I look back and I'm like, and you think it's a ladder, and there's you go to these local races every weekend, and everyone seems like they're kind of doing the same thing and putting in the work, and trying to climb this thing. And then I look back and I'm like, there are 3 of us who did that. There's only 3 people who climb that ladder. Like that's not even a real thing. It's me, Ted, and Keel Reinen. At least from that age, everyone else like kind of did the national team and did the pro thing. So it's sort of like this imaginary thing that we were going for, that we did, but I wouldn't like recommend it or even say it's a thing.
Interesting.
You got off to a great start as a pro tour guy, winning the Tour de San Luis, a stage there, and finishing second to Nairo, which is, man, you must have felt like this is it. I've arrived. This is going to be my career. So how did you feel at that point? What did you think your future held at that point when you look from 24 from a guy racing at that age, year 2014?
Yeah, you're right. Things definitely looked good at that moment. So when I came off, when I kind of got to the top of the North American leaderboard, whatever, when I was riding for Bissell in 2013, and there were a few races that like not only did I win, I kind of was able to dominate, and to show that like, okay, I deserve a shot at Europe, but still like a very late start to go to the World Tour, and a big question mark. I think part of what it's a risk to sign someone who, the Redlands Classic is a race that I won, and like I think the total of that race, it's a 5-day race. I think it's like 14 hours total. It's just not at all comparable to the effort that you do in a big race in Europe. So like I had to really, change my body and change what I was able to do. So like the US, you're kind of sitting in the pack at 200 watts, and then say it's a mountaintop finish. That was the only thing I was really going to do well at. You're basically just taking the sleigh ride for a few hours, and then it's a 15-minute power test, which took me many years to like be able to win. And then you go to Europe, and it's 275 watts for 4 hours, and then a power test. And that's just what it takes to sit in the pack there. And I had to make myself able to do that 275 watts with the 4 hours, and so that was definitely a struggle. San Luis, I got lucky the first day. There was a big breakaway that I got a 5-minute lead on the peloton essentially, and I think the peloton was like, okay, who's this no-name first-year 26-year-old skinny kid, and assumed that I would lose all that time to everyone, which they were correct, but I was able to hold off everybody but Nairo. So they underestimated, but their estimation was very low, and I was able to not lose 5 minutes to the rest of the pack. So yeah, winning my first stage was super cool. And then the last day of that race was, or not the last day, the stage 5 or 6 was like a mountaintop finish that we all kind of approached together. And I was definitely supposed to lose 15 minutes and completely topple down the GC. But I think I came 8th or 9th. I forget. Like I held on, and everyone's like, okay, this guy doesn't suck. So I went to Europe with a little bit of confidence that was then quickly wiped away over the course of that year. By the end of that year, I had it figured out pretty well. I was able to like find the front, stay at the front, and do my work. But it's a different sport in Europe versus the States.
Yeah,
that's for sure. Yeah. So you talk about changing your body, which I hear athletes talk about a lot, especially nowadays that we've got all these amazing tools. And I know I see on your Instagram feed talking about just some of these tools and things as well. So I guess talk us through that awareness of your body, what it's doing in that moment, changing it when it needs to be changed for particular event or particular goal.
It's just training. Like when the marginal gains concept, it's when you're a pro, you don't have access to that. So like the track riders do, like some guys, if you're a bigger name, you get to talk about your equipment. But like if you're me, you ride what they give you, and you ride it how they gave it to you. So I don't have a say in what my lubricant is, or what, like maybe what my tires are pumped up to. We could talk about, but for the most part, like the mechanics are professionals, and the high level teams, to their credit, do have like some science and research, and they're doing that sort of thing. They're doing it right. But generally, it's especially like in the earlier years, that stuff wasn't available. So what I could control was, obviously like my training, my body. So you look at, okay, these are the goals I have this year. So there was a stage at Cascade that was a mountaintop that I almost won one year. Like I attacked and got caught in the last K. And then the next year I was like, okay, I know how to win that stage. And I was training in Big Bear, and I looked at my power file from the year before, and I was like, okay, it's this much for this hours is kind of what it's like to be in the pack. And then, last year at the end of that, I did, at 4,000 feet, I did 420 watts for 10 minutes to finish it off after doing this many kilojoules in this many hours. And I spent like half that summer training in Big Bear, doing that same number of kilojoules, and then emptying it on a 10-minute climb until I got to the power I wanted. And then I won that stage at Cascade. Just like a lot of work for a 3.5-hour race. But that times any effort you're doing, you kind of just break it down and simulate it and make sure you're getting the rest and all the other stuff. But that was what I could control at the times.
Yeah, I think about that a lot. You and I talk occasionally and trade ideas or talk lubricants and stuff like that. But I mean, you've put yourself in a spot now where you have it so much better than really almost any pro currently racing for a pro team. I mean,
Don't you accept?
so, I mean, I think people don't, and maybe you can go a little deeper into kind of the European race experience, but, I think it's not quite what a lot of the American public thinks that it is in terms of equipment. Like you said, you get what they give you.
Right.
I guess walk us through that and your thoughts.
When it comes to equipment, like, most of the stuff is good. I will give them credit for that. They're trying, and all the top tier brands make a nice bike. But you don't have a choice. If a certain frame like speaks to you or gets along with you, tough crap. You ride for, if you ride for Ineos, you're on a Pinarello. etc. So essentially, like those guys, I think what you're forced to do, what I always did was just like, you trust that to exist, and you take care of yourself and your health and your fitness. Now I'm in a much better place where I can pick and choose with the caveat of like, I still need, brands that can afford to sponsor me. And I pay the bills this way, but what I do now, basically, instead of racing, I have a collection of sponsors, and I come up with my own adventures, content, creative stuff to do. A world tour team goes to sponsors and says, "Hey, I'm going to do the Tour de France. You have to give me $5 million." And I say, "I'm going to go do this many videos, this many Instagram posts, and you have to give me $5." And I think I think the return on investment is good. I think all my sponsors are generally happy with it. And my life in general, I do get to choose my own stuff and work on my own bikes, and use what I like and work with brands who I like the people. I have gotten to say no to people that I don't like, which, it took me a few years to get there, but that was just a nice thing of just like, no, like you made me angry. I'm not going to work with you, or like, I don't like your, you sponsor this guy. So, and I, don't believe in him. Yeah. I get to like involve principle and personal stuff that like teams you just kind of get to move away from. So yeah, that's been nice too.
So do you watch pro racing, and is there any part of it you miss? I mean, you were still a pro, but we're talking about the team pro racing. Do you watch it, and is there any part that you miss?
Well, the thing is, like the feeling of winning, like it's fun to get a KOM, but there's no adrenaline to it. Like, it's not the real thing. I can look at a photo of myself like winning my first race when I was on Jelly Belly at 23, and I get goosebumps from that, but like it does emotionally, like from the achievement, the whole thing, like it just what I do now, I call it like kind of a methadone. Like there is a feeling to it, and I get to feel proud of an accomplishment that I know is competitive is a thing. Like I'll go do, a climb that 50,000 people have attempted, and I'm faster than them, and that's an achievement, and I worked hard for that, and I deserve that. But it just, attacking with a K to go and sticking it, it's just, there's no feeling comparable to that. So like if I miss anything, it's that, but ultimately, like when you get into sports, that's going to go away, right? Like, you're not going to have that feeling forever. So that's something that everyone sort of makes peace with from the beginning. I miss the people. Like I had some just, every year I would just kind of collect, now I call them like a life teammate. There'd just be someone who like I'd bond with on a team that I'm still in touch with. Harder to see those folks, but those relationships still exist. The bus, all that stuff is fun. Being the race is fun. Like, it's, bumping elbows at high speed. There's a thrill to all of that. Like the part that I hate the most is also the part that was kind of fun. Just like, sometimes you're going 70 miles an hour on a bicycle. Like, that's fun. It's also super dumb.
In your underwear.
Right. It's like, I look at it now and I'm like, so the answer, I don't watch races. Unless like, sometimes like I'll see on Twitter that like a friend is in a breakaway and I'll watch that because I'll want to see them win if that's a possibility. Like I'll find a bad live stream. But generally, like when I watch it, I'm just like, I can't believe I ever did that. I can't believe how bad I wanted to do that. Like if I'd still, if Vaughters had hired me another year, I'd probably still be there. Because that's how bad I wanted at the time. And I hope my friends get out alive. When I watch, I'm like, I can't believe people are doing this. It's horrifying. And it's weird how quickly that happened for me. It was 6 months after I raced. I was like, holy crap, I used to do those.
Wow.
Yeah, it's weird. Now I ride on the, with cars. So,
yeah, which
I ride Sunset Boulevard
maybe
every week.
Yeah, objectively maybe
I don't know.
More dangerous.
I don't know.
Yeah,
I'm still here.
We try not to think. Humans are good at denial. That's what I always say, right? Where it's really powerful. When you're in it, you're doing the stupid thing. It's easy to not think it's stupid, and those are hard judgments to make, right?
Right.
We do that all the time.
Doing like the Manhattan Beach Grand Prix was a big crit in 2013. I was like, you get there 2 hours before, and the cat 3s are racing and the cat 2s are racing before the pro race, and I'm just like walking back with my number from registration, and I see dudes like ripping around this corner. I'm like, man, they're cornering fast. I was like, well, that's the cat 3s. I'm about to go around that 2 miles an hour faster. It's like I can't believe they're holding it up around that bend. And I was like, I'm going to do twice as many laps at a higher speed. It's just weird to remove yourself from it.
Yeah, I know that bend quite well. They call it Crash Corner, by the way.
Yeah,
nice, huh?
I'd either be away or I'd not. I want some good preens at that race.
Right.
Yeah.
So, at some point you settle on retirement, and first, I guess we would like to know kind of what pushed you that way, and then what you had the book out at the time, which was great, so you kind of had an idea what retirement could look like, but what other things out there said to me, oh yeah, I could make a career out of retirement?
No, I want to be absolutely clear. This none of this was intended, and I think like if I had planned it, I'd be insane. Kind of the way it worked was I wrote the first book when I signed to Garmin Sharp, so I wrote that at the end of 2013, and it came out in 2014 while I was racing, and that was supposed to be like the only book that was a happy ending because now I won the Tour of St. Louis. I'm just going to be a world tour guy until I'm 35, and I'm going to make a decent living and retire and be a coach or director, whatever guys do. That was how I thought it was going to go, and then the world tour kicked me in the nuts pretty quick. The Garmin Sharp merged with Cannondale. I went back to Optum for a year. I won Redlands again. I went back to the same team, which was then called Cannondale Drapac. And they that year, like I was never really taken seriously. I never quite figured out what that was. But I did the Grand Fondo Paris-Nice. They sent me to Roubaix on 36 hours notice. Like I hadn't trained for it. I'd never ridden the bike before. Or like somebody got sick. They're like, all right, throw Phil into that. At no point did I have like a schedule that I could prepare for the next event. It was just like, all right, go here. All right, you're home. You're supposed to do this race next. Okay, you're not doing this race. So like, I was just in this weird limbo that whole year, and performed as well as a human could be expected in that. Like, honestly, like I had fun. I engaged with the sponsors. But I was a weird version of like what Lachlan's job has turned into. Like, I think JV knew that like a human facing role was needed on the team, but didn't really know how to do it. And I kind of just got beaten into a weird merger of it. So that was what that was that year. But, I got to engage with people and do events, and it was fine. And then I wasn't renewed. There was no conversation of me being renewed at the end of the year. And you do a race a year like that. It's like, well, what are your results? A bunch of nothing. So no one's going to sign you. So that really, like, yeah, they put me out to pasture pretty bad. And I was only 30 and still, like, physically good. It just didn't have a chance to show it. Every race I went to, I performed to, I did what I was asked. So I was pretty salt at the end of that, and had to write a book, sort of correct the first one. The first book, it ended with this happy, hey kids, you should get into pro cycling. Like, you can go world tour if you try hard. and then I was like, oh crap, I got to correct that. So Draft Animals was like, okay, I've achieved my dream. Here's what that is. And here's how I kind of have learned to make peace with it. And which was, honestly, like, writing it was just very cathartic. It took me 6 months. And I think that's the best thing I've ever done as far as like what I've created. I reread that book once a year just to kind of remember what I went through and put myself back in those places. And I'm still really proud of it. But that was my farewell. At the point when kind of by the time I had that book deal, I had, God, what a mess. I had a TV deal. I haven't really talked about this much because it's embarrassing, but I live in LA. I've lived in LA for a couple of years at that point. And, you meet people at the coffee shop who are producers, who are actors, stuff like that. And one guy, I don't want to name him, but like kind of a big deal, has made shows that you've heard of, rides bikes. And I was like, why isn't there like a cycling travel show? Like, that should exist. Like Anthony Bourdain on a bike. And he was like, you know what, you're right. And he got me an agent, United Talent Agency, and I started pitching the show. That was during 2016 when I already knew I was going to get fired. I was just like, I'd go do, like, I train in Hollywood Hills. It's funny, like, you go to a TV pitch meeting and you feel like the first time you meet some fancy lunch spot, and I would dress up and brush my hair and drive over, and it's valet parking in my crappy car. But I'd take it seriously, and by the 25th meeting, I did intervals on Beverly Glen, and then I go down completely sweaty between intervals and have a lunch meeting with a bazillionaire from a network. And I ended up actually like coming off better. But I did that like that whole summer. There's my training ride mid coffee stop would just be like some meeting for that. And during the tour of Alberta, I signed a deal with A&E I was going to host a TV show.
Wow.
And I was like, this is a fantastically graceful exit to this silly sport. And then that was like on a Thursday. I'm going to get the timeline a little bit wrong, but it was insane how tight it was. It was like a yes on a Thursday, and then on Tuesday, the production company was out of business and the entire thing was dead, because that's how the TV world works, apparently. Like, and this is just, every friend I have in TV is just like, oh yeah, I've had 75 of those. But my agent at the time was, what was funny too was I was supposed to work at a sports agency. Like, I kind of had that locked up as like, here's my job. And that was like, from my former agent, was basically just going to hire me to work under him. So I kind of had that, and then I was just casting around at other stuff that was kind of shot in the dark. The end of that year, I started uploading my rides to Strava for the first time, and at that point, like, Strava was hyper competitive among people who weren't competitive, if that makes sense, people who weren't racing. And Strava was just like, kind of, there was a toxicity to it, I think, that you took my KOM, you jerk, I'm going to go back and take all your KOMs, and it was kind of a grumpy place. And so I started uploading my rides and my old rides and my current rides, and just expressing it in a way of like, hey, look, I got my butt kicked for 15 years in this sport, but like, this is fun. And I was expressing a way that I think Strava kind of needed. And at the same time in LA, there was a doper who, well, I don't want to get into him before I get sued, but a guy who had tested positive at Masters Nationals. He had every KOM in LA under like a pseudonym, and no one knew who he was, and people figured out who he was. And then I started taking his KOMs because I'm not, like, drugs work, but I was world tour. So I was able to kind of get every KOM that I wanted from this guy. And it turned into this like funny story. It was like the most clicked article on cycling tips that year. And so that at the time, like, I go back to my agent, I'm like, okay, this TV show died. Now what do I do? And he was like, you should try making it on YouTube. And I was like, well, what's that about? And what I kind of turned into, and then sponsors who had worked with me on teams were kind of like, hey, I like what you do. Do you want to do a version of like, what Ted King was doing and Tim Johnson. There was precedent of guys just like going to events with logos and brands. And I was like, well, what if instead of that, I make a YouTube show about Strava? And I had like a handful of sponsors who were just like willing to take the risk on that. And that was year one. And yeah, it was all just weird things aligning. And I happen to live in a city where all the KOMs are held by a doper, et cetera. Yeah. So
yeah,
I was forced into it.
Right here in LA, that became a hyper topic of conversation. We were all onto that. We all knew what was going on,
dude.
And most of the people were cheering for you. We're like, yes, thank you for cleaning up the KOMs in LA.
That was how it was. I remember like being on like a first date from like a girl I met on an app or something, and I get recognized. I never got recognized for bike racing. I got recognized for Strava in Los Angeles.
Really?
It was very strange. But that's also a sign that like, this is something that's worth kind of poking at. If the world, if I do one kind of post on Instagram that gets twice the likes of the other ones, that's the world saying like, hey, I like this thing. So like, to an extent, keep doing it.
I think it was so timely too, and I think your outspokenness on the doping topic, right? It's the thing that nobody ever wants to touch, and I think you've done a really nice job of navigating that, as you're doing here, yeah. Right? It's not naming names and doing things that are going to get you in trouble, but just being honest about it. And I think the sport, we need a lot more of that, in my opinion.
What's funny is I think, like, ironically, that was sort of what made me not work in the world tour was I had the clean tattoo. I was outspoken. I think like I built an audience of the Americans really wanted me to go to the world tour, and the way I was riding on Bissell in 2013. Vaughters had, he had his scandal then with Danielson and Zabriskie and Van de Velde. They all admitted and served these like very light suspensions that I think a lot of people weren't happy about. And then a guy with a clean tattoo starts, winning everything by a minute in the spring, and JV had to sign me. Like, he didn't want to sign me. I think he had to. Was sort of how, like, looking retrospect, like the situation was like I had him in checkmate. I had no idea. And they put me on the team, but now like I got there for being outspoken about doping, except now I'm among all these dopers, including JV and half the directors and a bunch of these. Like, I was just, my anti-doping put me in an environment where everyone hated me, and where I wasn't going to get along. I think that kind of contributed to me like not getting a good race schedule and not kind of getting treated in a way that I might have deserved at that point. Yeah, looking back, it was both ways.
Well, so much for A&E, but thank God for YouTube. You came along. You made
there was a whole other one, PBS, that COVID killed too. Is the best part.
Right.
Yeah.
Worst retirement ever, which is a great title to the whole idea of what you do. Then along comes this privateer gravel racing thing, and we saw a lot of pros turn to that away from the European peloton. We've seen more than a handful of pros turn to that, but not Phil Gaimon. Like, you have stayed away from that gravel scene and going that way. Why is that? Why have you stuck to your own thing and stayed away from that half of it?
I think a few things. One is like I really love riding uphill. Like the what speaks to my soul is ripping up a climb really fast. And like I enjoy riding gravel, but there's still like the whole ripping downhill really fast thing. Like I don't want to do that ever again. I look at people sliding around turns and crashing, and it's just like I went through that. And I've kind of created this thing that it's working. Where I go uphill fast and I go for KOMs and my people get it. And I don't really have to like follow that, I guess, in a way, but I also don't think what I'm doing is that different, I think those guys are all, they're using gravel as a means to content, right? Like ultimately the Tour de France is content. It's a way to share a message to an audience, and you get to sell against that as a person or team. And these guys, I think I always thought like I think I'm the first person to monetize Strava, as in like to sell sponsors for it, and for a long time I was like, why am I the only one doing this? And like then I kind of thought like, there might just only be room for one, because what else really is there than what I'm doing on that, and who's going to sort of copy it? So I don't know. I think there'll be more creative versions of here's gravel, here's podcasts, here's stuff like that the guys are going to figure out. But right now, yeah, gravel is kind of an open door of, hey, I have a name, I have credibility, I have good legs. I can get sponsors for this, and it's cool to see folks kind of blazing their own trail and figuring it out.
Well, while we're playing armchair quarterback, then what do you think of that scene? Like, is there significant growth potential here? I mean, we see a lot of race organizers kind of going, look, we need to re-energize American racing. We need to put more behind it. Is this, do you think this will live up to the hype it's being given right now as a pro sport?
I think it has a lot of growing pains to go through, is kind of how it looks. The death of the road scene, which started when I started, essentially, from the health net to 90 days, and it's just steadily gone down to office park criteriums now. There's still some cool races, but there's not like, I think the winner of the Tour of the Gila was like technically an amateur. And it used to just be like the top 60 were professionals and paid professionals. So yeah, I don't know how that gets fixed, and I think gravel has sort of, I guess, filled the void, but I don't think it's really replaced it, because I'm gonna say it's more top heavy. If anyone's making a living on that, it's 5-10 people, and they're all ultimately really just making a living off of their names from World Tour, right? Like they're not. I think very few came up from there's exceptions, but I think very few came up from Dylan Johnson. I think is a good example. My jukebox teammate, who he didn't race professionally. He got into gravel and did YouTube and content and like kind of blazed it his own way from the beginning. So there's a few of those, but at this point it's that. And I think like the races themselves, the element of participatory marathon style totally applies to marathons, but I just don't know the handful of gravel races that I've done. It didn't feel like I wanted it to, as far as why am I bumping elbows with a guy who's going to be gone in 10 miles, and why does it feel sketchy, and why am I not like doing my own race? The women need to have their own starts, like that part. When you hear like a race report of a woman who won an event, and she's like, well, I drafted this guy from this mile to this mile, and this guy from this mile to this mile. It's just like, it's not fair to anyone, and that's just not a competition that's worthy of the athletes in it. So there's things need to be figured out, and I think they will. But and also, like, I don't know if they do any drug testing. Like, if we're just going to get into that part, I'm sure there's something now, but it was zero up until recently. So, like I said, growing pains. We'll see where it evolves. But yeah, I like my niche at this point still.
Yeah, you've certainly built an environment around yourself where you have control, which I feel like is something you don't ever have. Certainly at the World Tour level. I mean, you're just on for the ride, and I think, great story.
I really
so,
have PTSD.
Well done.
I think from my 20s and the lack of control. Just the months of just like sitting around waiting to find out like where am I going tomorrow. Can my mom come visit in Girona, or will I be sent to a race that week? Like, it's just that it's tough. And the guys who are a little bit better have a better life than that, but. For where I am, I'm happy and lucky that what I fell into.
So let's go back to the KOMs, and you've done some Everesting and plenty of Everesting attempts too. Take us into that on a marginal gain level. Like, are there specific things you do to set up, to fill, to what have you, to either tackle a KOM or an Everesting, and how do the two differ, especially with bike setup, if they do?
Sure. The KOMs are definitely much more complicated because it's, KOMs can be 4%, it can be 8%, and the setup is completely different. So I kind of have like, okay, if I'm going to average this speed, I'm setting up for weight focus, and if I'm this speed, I'm setting up for aerodynamics. Factor just came out with, I just got the new VAM, the O2 VAM disc, which is, it has an aero front end. So it's more aero than the light one, but it's not quite as light as the light one. So I have to figure out where that one fits in. Cause it's definitely slippery. The front of it looks like the aero bike, but it's a lot lighter than the aero bike, but it's still not as light as the rim brake Everesting setup I have. So yeah, now I have 3 bikes kind of in that arsenal, that's fun to play with. Everesting is definitely, marginal gains heavy. You get something right and figure that out over the record 6.5 hours now. It's that adds up, and that's the thing. Like I still want to tackle Everesting again, but I just know how far I am from being able to do it. And a lot of it is, so much of it was the course selection was the part that I gradually figured out.
Yeah.
Is doing the right hill that, Everesting took off in 2020. And I just literally didn't have access to a hill that the record could be taken on. And I still haven't really, and from trying that, I completely toasted my body for that year. Just way too many 8-hour rides. And then just to watch people find like these 16% climbs that are dead straight and perfect for this effort. It's just like, oh, I have to be like 20 watts better than them to even come close to that. So, and then to really burn myself out on the attempt. So that's in my list to figure it out again, or I know what to do if now will my body agree. And then the KOMs, it's just, the wax lubes has been awesome. Chapeau, Josh. That lube is honestly, like, I've used chain lube for a million years. Like, the thing gets squeaky and it's like, all right, I'll put some lube on it. And then this one I put on, I'm like, oh, my bike feels faster. And like that literally has never happened in my life. And I'm not crazy because I've like made my friends try it and everyone says the same thing. I'm like, oh yeah, this is actually, it's noticeably smooth and the bike stays clean. Not that it gets dirty in California anyway. We get dust. But yeah, all that stuff it's a fun thing that like now I can control my own bike again. It's up to me what gearing I use and all that stuff. I didn't have access as a pro. I have to relearn all of it.
Yeah, it's the rate of change. It's funny you mentioned the Factor. It's like I think when you and I first started talking Everesting a couple years ago, and it was like light versus aero, and now there's all these like slices in between. Like I tease Rob at Factor, like you're making this so hard. A lot of these used to be, like you could kind of model it both ways and be like, bike A or bike B, and now there's 4 options in between. Like, oh man, like you just keep merging the best of this and the best of that.
I still think for Everesting and Everesting only, like almost nothing matters but weight. Like at the gradient that I have to go for the record, it's aerodynamics just, and you're going down for 10 seconds at a time. You're going back up. Like you never really even get up to speed. So I still have the rim brake bike exists in case of Everesting. But I think everything else is going to be the disc bike moving forward.
Yeah, we got to find you that right hill.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, it might be Mountain Gate.
I know which one it is. I just have to get there.
It's Mountain Gate, is it not? I'm going to use a little local knowledge on you here, but Mountain Gate?
Mountain Gate's the one that I came to, that I did, that I first set the Everesting record on in 2020. Not nearly steep enough to come anywhere near the record again, is the reality.
Oh, really?
So my total, the best way to express how important the gradient is, my total distance that day, and this is Mountain Gate is 11%. It's insanely steep. It's if you've driven over the 405, you see this thing. It's perfect for Everesting's straight down. Like it was safe. There's no driveways. Like I got lucky for that. But I did 100 miles or like 99 miles, something like that in that effort. The current record was like 65 miles. So that's how much less distance he had to cover to do the same. So that the gradient is, I think it's like 15.5% was Ronan McLaughlin. He gets named. He deserves it. For that one, he did that one twice. And there's nothing like that around here. There's no hill. I found one that was similarly steep, but it was over in Malibu, a little bit sketchy. There were cars. I had to have like people at each bend to shout out the turns. And it was also like the turns were full speed, but like full speed if you're really driving the bike, which will wear on you 3 hours in. So like I made 2 attempts on that, and then really had to like sit out for 4 months. Was basically like what I did to myself.
Yeah, that's gruesome.
I'm still getting back from that.
So I guess we're coming up on time here, but I feel like we have to talk cookies.
Oh yeah,
because we haven't talked cookies yet. So
sure.
And I think a shout out for No Kid Hungry.
No Kid Hungry. Yeah, appreciate that. Yep.
Yeah. Which I know is a huge use. So I guess let's talk No Kid Hungry, and then we'll talk cookies.
Okay. Yeah, I can tie those in a little bit. So the end of my when I moved to LA, I kind of met a group of cyclists, my local friends. One of them puts on events, and he had promoted a Fondo, and I was kind of like I was thinking like the riding in Malibu is incredible, and at the time nobody knew about it. I was surprised to me when like I visited here. I was like, holy crap, the hills here are. It's literally it's a tie for the best riding in the world, a 10-way tie. But there's nothing better. It's perfect out here. It's incredible, especially if you like hills. And nobody knew about it. And I made another friend who had a restaurant that had these incredible cookies. I was the cookie guy. That's another whole podcast. I won't get into how I became the cookie guy, but I was the cookie guy. So I would just take that at face value. And I meet this like celebrity chef who's on TV, and he makes these great cookies. And then I've got a buddy who puts on an event. I'm like, what if we, made an event in Malibu? And everybody's like, yeah, I'll make cookies for that. And I'm like, we're talking like 5,000 cookies. He's like, yeah, we got this. So the idea was I made this awesome course in Malibu, and it raises money. And so he works at this charity organization called Chef Cycle, which that's just a bunch of celebrity chefs who do a 3-day ride. It just happened a few weeks ago to benefit No Kid Hungry. And these are like TV chefs more than cyclists, some of each. But Ace of Cakes, Duff Goldman, like that. Like he goes out there and he trains for it, but he's not like a big cyclist. He doesn't ride his bike a ton. So it's people who like 100 miles is insane. And they dig deep and they do it and they raise a lot of money. So I kind of joined that, and my Fondo raised money for No Kid Hungry, and it was sort of just out of that relationship. And I realized another element of Worst Tireman Ever is I was like, oh, I'm like having an impact. It's not a selfish. At the end of it, like you do a school visit, and it's like, oh, there's this whole building ate because of what we did today, and that's something like I didn't have as a racer that just kind of doesn't exist. So yeah, I pushed that all year, and it's just another way that like I get to feel good about myself and not otherwise. A YouTube channel about KOMs is just horribly selfish. And here's just like a fun way that somehow I just say like, hey, this is you think this is suffering. Some people actually suffer. Like, yeah, I'm sweating on top of a mountain. I did it on purpose. Some people actually like need help. So click here, and God bless them. Like folks do it, and my campaigns have raised almost $600,000 the last few years. So that's been great, and that ties into the whole cookie thing.
You're also out in front of an effort to try and make LA streets safer for cyclists, right? I mean, you're almost a politician at this point.
No, politics. If anything I learned from this whole petition thing, it's I got into advocacy like, as you go from riding with a follow car and closed roads and to riding in a big city, and you just realize like just how horrible it is, and how people like some people can't afford a car, and like I'm on Sunset Boulevard, like I can control traffic, I can go 30 miles an hour, I can take a lane. It's not a problem for me, but like, you see children and they're trying to ride to school and they're getting buzzed by the same stuff I am. And it's, especially LA where the weather's always perfect. And other than like there's hills, but the city is flat, and like, everyone should be riding a bike and outside, and the car culture here is insane. So there's a weird like hotbed, and I've fallen into just, noticing what's going on and trying to do something about it. But anything I've learned is like, yeah, politics is horrible. So I'll be over here and like I'm not going to run for anything, because you like the specific thing. I'm doing a petition signing this weekend, and what it is the city passed an ordinance that they have to, that when a new road is paved, I forget, it was like thousands of miles are required, or hundreds of miles. It was a very significant change to the city of Los Angeles, and when they pave a new road, they have to paint a bike lane in it. It's that simple. And it's been like 7 years, and they've painted 2% of what they've already allocated and budgeted and promised. It's 2%. And so the petition would make it where it forces them to do what they already agreed to do, because this is how politics works. And it's not an option of whatever local. So so I have been getting involved. It's Healthy Streets LA is the thing. It only really applies to LA people, because you have to be an LA voter to sign it. But it would actually like change the look of this city, and it's the direction the world needs to go. Anything under 5 miles, like I do on an e-bike or a fixie or something now. I run errands on my road bike. Once in a while, I'll throw a lock on it. I just think like there's just certain basics that we can and should do, and also like you know a few people who get hit by a car, and it gets real pretty quick, and that's happening more and more.
Absolutely. Well, thanks for doing that. We especially as folks here in LA. I mean, I was a bike commuter for many years around here, and like you, I was able to beat traffic and ride fast and stay out of the way of cars for the most part. I mean, I had my share of close calls, but I understand what you're saying. I mean, for a slower rider on a townie or a cruise bike or a city bike, it's a much different story. Those folks feel completely vulnerable to to 1-ton vehicles nearly running them off the road. So we appreciate you doing that. Phil Gaimon, look, I'm a fan of your videos. I love your YouTube channel. My wife is a fan too. In fact, every time I put a video on, she says, wait, I want to watch. Put it up on the TV. I want to watch. And I think the reason is what she told me, is kind of in a world of goggled sunglasses and stoic looks and tight-fitting jerseys and kind of these characters you really don't get to know very well. She finds you, approachable and funny and not too serious. And I think that A&E thing you kind of dreamed about early on, that travel log on bike, is part of that too, and she really likes that. So, hey, thanks for the worst retirement ever, and thanks for being on Marginal Gains.
Yeah, thanks to both you guys and your wife.